Welcome to the ATA podcast, where we talk to former elite athletes sharing their insights and wisdom derived from successfully transitioning into life beyond the game. A very warm welcome to the Athlete Transition Accelerator Podcast. Apologies that Cal can't be with us today because of a family emergency, but I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Conrad Smith. Now, Conrad is a living legend in the sport. I don't want to embarrass him, but a man who's played close to 100 caps for the New Zealand All Blacks, a man who's had the privilege of lifting a World Cup not once but twice, had a distinguished Super Rugby career, and also a spell playing over in France. So, Conrad, a very warm welcome, and thank you very much for giving us your time this morning for you, very early in the morning for you.
No problem. Thanks, James. Thanks for the welcome, and look forward to chatting.
Now, we always ask every guest that comes in to tell us just a little bit of a reflection, something that elicits a sense of pride. The podcast is very much about life beyond sport, that transition process, but it's always nice just to set the scene and take the athlete back into that sporting chapter and for them to pull out one or two memories that really mean a lot to them. Now, obviously, within the intro, there's probably a couple of leads in there, but when you look back at all those years that you spent playing, Conrad, what things stand out for you? What brings you that real sense of pride when you have the chance to reflect now that you've retired?
Yeah, good question. I suppose the standout ones you mentioned, and in terms of World Cups, and they were pinnacles, but I must admit, like they're often the ones that people look in and I get reminded about them a lot. And so actually the ones I probably cherish a little bit more are the ones that I only, that come to my mind and sort of the moments where I am daydreaming a little bit or something sparks a memory. And that would, like, I think most people say it's people. Like, there's a great group. I was very fortunate to be part, and join when I talk about the All Black team, it was a team that sort of went through quite a transition period just when I sort of came in, and any sportsman or woman will tell you the importance of timing. And for me, it was being at an age and at a time and joining a group when the coaching group had changed within the All Blacks, and they really put a real emphasis on building a culture. And then 10 years later, we were living out all that vision of that coaching team, and we'd had a core group of players that stuck together through the majority of that. And man, we had, obviously, as I say, World Cups, but there were wins away. I love traveling with the team and experiencing different cultures, and I think that playing in South Africa, that was for us the ultimate experience, where it was a cauldron of just a special place to play. You absolutely knew there was people baying for your blood, but you went in there, and we didn't always win. We had some great battles, but the wins were pretty special. So I always say, like, winning and a couple of wins we had in Joburg against our great foe, they were probably standout moments. And then just closer to home, I was a one club man, so I stayed with Wellington, the city I went to university, and we built up a pretty special team and culture again. So yeah, there's a lot of good memories and good people that I had the good fortune of playing with a long time, and that's a group I stay in touch with and still talk to regularly, and they're standout moments if I were to pick a couple.
Yeah, no, fabulous ones. And I we're going to talk about life beyond that, but I think what I always admire is the pressure that New Zealand international sportsmen have to deal with, because I think, we've got listeners all around the world, but for people that are not familiar, the intensity and the level of support and passion and expectation in New Zealand is almost unprecedented. And that World Cup in 2011, I always remember as an observer, the pressure you must have been under, the level of expectation. It's been hosted in your own country, and to come through and win and face that pressure, meet that pressure, and ultimately prevail, I think is testimony to the group. And there's no surprise you talk about culture and the cohesiveness of that group, because it needed, I imagine, to be cohesive to deal with that level of pressure and prevail against it.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you add to that the losses that we'd had, so we won a World Cup in '87, the very first, and but then lost every one up until 2011, every 4 years. And I'd say the majority of those we went in as favourites, expected to win, and always the team came home. And the majority, you mentioned the group in 2011, the majority of us had been there in 2007.
Right.
And that was, no exception to the others I talked about. We were expected to win. We went through the early parts of the tournament in good form and then crashed out in the quarterfinal, the worst we've ever, and still the worst we've ever done. And it was actually from all that we, built ourselves back up and took a lot of lessons. And anyone in that 2011 group, would say the same, that it was from the disappointments and all the hurt and pain from 2007, we actually, realised a lot of exactly what you talked about, how to deal with pressure, how to acknowledge that this World Cup, this beast is entirely separate to the games that we'd play, and it's something we weren't good at as a team. Like, we had a number of losses and we had to confront that and deal with it head on, because we could win, rugby championships, we could win the Bledisloe Cup, we could go on tours unbeaten. We had seemed to have no problem doing that. We were doing that regularly, but we couldn't win this World Cup. And the first thing was, just seeing it as a special, it was a tournament that created its own pressure that we had to deal with. And I think as soon as we started talking about it that way and reframing it, and preparing ourselves for it, it was, we got back into a better place. And hey, it's still sport, and it was a bounce of the ball that we actually won it. But to back it up again in 15, I think we showed that at least mentally we were ready and had taken a step in the right direction in terms of dealing with the pressure that a World Cup created.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's to the credit of the organisation. As a voracious reader, I read a lot around different organisations, and something that comes back, irrespective of the players and who's wearing the jersey, is this reference to the quality of the culture that is developed, retained within the All Blacks. And I think those periods of adversity, you find those lessons, and they're passed down from one generation to another, because nobody can step back and not be impressed by the winning percentages of the New Zealand All Blacks. The personnel changes, the coaches change, but still those wins are achieved. And you've touched on something there. When we're talking to athletes, Conrad, there's often a little bit of trepidation about, well, I hear about transferable skills, but what are they, and what can I bring from my sporting background into industry? And there's a couple of great examples there. The ability to deal with pressure, some of the pressure that elite athletes like yourself have had to experience is unrivaled, and you come out the other side and you succeed. And if you don't succeed, you can learn from that. So I think the ability to work in high pressure environments, I think resilience, because you need resilience to bounce back from those difficult times. And I wasn't going to mention it. I was talking about the highlights. You brought 2007 up. I know that must have been very challenging at the time. So we've got the pressure, we've got the resilience, and also the willingness to learn from adversity. I think it sometimes holds people back in industry, that they celebrate the wins and they shy away from the difficult conversations about underperformance. But I think you've sort of thrown a light immediately there on, it wasn't going well. We needed to learn. We needed to change. We had the resilience, we developed it, and we developed the ability to deal with the pressure. So I know we're going to talk a lot about where you are now, but would you agree with that, Conrad, about some of these transferable skills that you develop on the playing field that can then come forward into industry?
Yeah, and I think the one that always strikes me, and I'm out of the game now, and I see it within workplace or whatever, is just the ability, like sportsmen deal with feedback on a daily basis, and you learn how to give it, and you have to learn how to take it, and it's when it's done right, it's massively powerful, and it will help your culture, help your team, and if it's your business, excel. And I'm always surprised, although I shouldn't be, that outside of sport, if you were to take a typical business, that often if there's employees, they will go a year before they have a performance review or whatever you call it. And,
Yep.
and that might be the only opportunity that the person sits down with their employer, their boss, and they are critically assessed for what they do well and what they don't do well, and how that's managed. It can be extremely delicate. Like, this is not a easy process where you're talking about, "Oh, you do this well, but you need to work on this, and for this business to do better, you've got to do that." And how they respond to that is critical, and how you give that, if you're the employer, how you give that sort of feedback is really important. Yet in sport, that is happening every day. You are told, and you have to do it that way, because there are wins and losses on a weekend that are decided on your performance.
Yeah.
And so you are sat down on a Monday and you are told whether you played well or you played poorly. And the consequence of that, if you played poorly, you're not playing on the weekend. Like, that's brutal. That is not, you don't have anywhere near that in the real world. Like, and to live through that, however long you are, even if your career is only a year, you've gone through probably 20 selections, you've gone through 20 performance reviews, that a normal employer would take 20 years to build up that experience. So, it's the biggest one that struck me when I've sort of seen businesses and outside it. It's just that the ability to feedback and how that's done, and because it is a very difficult, challenging area. But in sport, because of the nature of sport, because you are playing every weekend, it's a skill everyone has to learn and master, and it can be transferred like that. That's gold in the business world, because it's not done every day. And if it was, who knows what benefit a business would get out of it? Like, if you could openly just go up to some of the workers and say, and without fear of being judged on it, just saying that's not good enough, put your standards up, because that's what's happens in sport. You get told every day, and you have to. So
and I think that if I can bottle that, and we will, Conrad, for the employers, because we obviously spend a lot of time talking to athletes, but also employers. Athletes have this trepidation: what are my transferable skills? Employers are, well, I know they were elite sports, but what will they bring? You've just given a great framework, because when somebody comes in and they hold others to account and they can start to develop that framework for giving and taking feedback, then all the standards rise. It's the same in sport, it's the same in business. And you're absolutely right, it doesn't happen. And I wear two hats. I'm coaching in business, I'm coaching athletes, so I see it all the time. And the other interesting point, Conrad, that I think athletes have to embrace is when you are on the receiving end of constructive criticism and you haven't performed well on a weekend and you're therefore not selected, you have a choice about how you respond. So in your former world, you can't just take the proverbial bat and ball home. You can't say, well, I'm going to go and sulk. I've had some negative feedback and I don't like it. Because you won't get selected again. So you have to condition yourself to embrace the feedback, process it, digest it, and strive to be better. Otherwise, you don't get back in. And I think that's another element of the brutality, but it helps you improve, and business will be better served for it if you could give feedback and everybody embraced it, put things into play, and then improved as a consequence.
Yeah. But and I'm just on that, like, but you learn, like, the person giving the feedback, so the coach in the sporting sense, you do learn how to be better, because some players will react poorly. Like, you talk about the reaction, you as a player, you have to learn how to take it. But coaches, absolutely, like that's what defines the good coaches. They are really good at giving that feedback, and you'll learn that the way you give it to me will be different than the way you give it to James or to a different player. And that's a skill again, that's what an employer has to know, like, and it's easy it's easier when you're doing it every day and you're doing it with 30 blokes than one employee, waiting for a yearly review to give that. So
and I think just to tie that up, it's such an important lesson, but I think it sets you up for leadership as well, because you're absolutely right. You get used to the nuances of who needs the softer delivery, the more direct delivery. It's exactly the same in leadership. So another classic transferable skill there is the ability to read your team, to understand how to deliver feedback, who needs the softer approach, who needs a slightly firmer approach, and that it takes time to develop. the other thing that comes to mind that we see a lot in industry is things can fester when you leave things for an annual review. Problems that took place in month 1 that are still existing in month 12, they become enormous. The beauty of the environment elite sports people are in is they're giving and taking feedback continually. So the problems are brought to the fore, dealt with, and we all move forward. So no, I think we talk a lot about attributes and what you can take across. So that's been a powerful endorsement of that particular area, Conrad. Now, I know as we move into where you are currently and what you're doing, there's going to be a tremendous amount of synergy because you obviously have a real passion for supporting people and particularly athletes in what they do beyond the sport. But before we get to that, it's always interesting to hear of people's transition. I know you spent a time after being a one-club man in New Zealand, you went over to the south of France and played in Po, and then you had a couple of roles post-retirement with the club. And so just tell us a little bit, just briefly, Conrad, about how once you stopped actually physically playing, what you did, because we often hear about people telling us, well, you should just drop straight into the thing you're going to do immediately. And that's not often the case. Often people experience different opportunities. They have to experiment. They have to dip their toe in the water. And I'm just curious how you moved from being that elite player to where you are now. Give us a little overview on that process and the timeline of what you did.
Yeah, I spent a bit of time thinking about it. I think that would be the first point. And that was because I had become already as a player, I was quite passionate. I could see the good and bad, like some players leaving the game and doing really well and others that really struggled. And so I was always someone who thought a bit more than just the oval ball. I like to think outside the game. And so it was, for me, it was, well, what was I going to do? And I understood my personality was also someone you mentioned before. Like I always made decisions based on experience. So I couldn't, I couldn't just picture myself as a coach or picture myself as a sports lawyer. I wanted to have some time to do a little bit of that, do a little bit of something else, and that's the way I could make my decisions. And that was so very much what I did. I finished playing in France, so I was offered a full coaching role. I turned it down and said, no, I don't want to coach unless I am passionate, and I can't be passionate until I know what it's like. So, I came back and said, look, I'll do a part-time role in terms of the coaching, and that gave me time for my family, but also the opportunity to work a little bit with the player association. So I worked with New Zealand rugby players while I was based in New Zealand, and then was in France for a couple of years. I'd met the group with International Rugby Players Association, who are based in Dublin. And so that was my first year out of playing. And again, this was sort of planned well in advance, that I could stay in France, do a little bit of coaching and then work with the Player Association. And then, 2 or 3 years of pretty much doing that, and outside influences like COVID and sort of moved me around. But ultimately, that is what I needed, because I did enough coaching to know coaching was not for me.
Right, yeah.
Again, probably something I suspected. There's, we don't need to talk about that. It's a great role, and there's a lot that I liked about it, but there were parts that I just couldn't see myself doing for the rest of my life. So,
but that's so important, Conrad. And sorry to jump in. It's just to reinforce that, because it's powerful to hear that you'd had that fabulous career. You experimented. You looked at it. It wasn't for you. That's absolutely fact. For some people, it's their dream opportunity. It's what they want to do. But there's nothing wrong with actually stepping into an environment, experiencing it, and deciding it's not right, and then looking at something else. But for the vast majority of people, we always explain and make people sort of reflect. You're going to be working outside of sport probably longer than you were playing in sport. Yes, some people have tremendously long careers, but if it's 10 to 15 years of elite sport on average, then there's a lot of years after that. You don't have to make a decision and say, well, that's me for the next few decades. So, I think, as you say, don't want to go too deeply into that, but I think the principle of try something, it's not for you, is wise advice.
And knowing, you talk about players, knowing that you don't have to stay in sport. Like we've talked about transferable skills, they transfer into into all sorts of other areas and if there is one bugbear of mine, it is the amount of players that think all they can do is coach. They've been in this rugby environment, in my case, it's but rugby environment for 10 years, I'm just going to coach.
Yeah.
And often, back to your point you just made, they'll coach, they'll know it's not for them, but they think that's all they can do. Mm-hmm. And 5 years later, they're an unhappy, often, not surprisingly, unsuccessful coach, and yet they just keep doing it. And
they get trapped in that cycle. Yeah. And so I'm curious, because obviously I know where you, so what is the role you currently do now? You touched on it briefly, but just for the benefit of clarity, what's the role you now have?
So I work with international rugby players still. So as mentioned, it was something I started while in France, and so we work with all the member player associations just on the global issues. So obviously, World Rugby, the international governing body, is based in Dublin, and we're the equivalent in a player association sense. So we have 12 members currently. So most tier one, if we call them, or high performance unions, have their own player associations, and we're a collective body representing them, and we sort of focus on the global issues that World Rugby deals with. So the rules of the game, the World Rugby regulations around eligibility and transfer of players, and those sort of issues. So that's what I've stayed in and worked in sort of full time for the last 3 or 4 years now.
Fabulous. And the reason why it was important to stress that, when I was just looking and reflecting, doing a bit of research ahead of the podcast, there was that element of part-time coaching, as you've alluded to with Poe, and you were sort of dipping your toe in part-time with this organisation as well, in a sort of legal counsel role. Is that right, Conrad? Because it adds to what you were saying about back yourself to explore. You don't just have to stay in sport, and you were obviously starting to build the relationships, and that was attractive to you, which led to then a full-time commitment.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I do consider myself fortunate in that my pathway into rugby wasn't typical. So I studied, I mentioned before, I played for Wellington. I wasn't born there. I ended up there to go to university, finished a law degree that sort of just at the same time that I got my first sort of contract to play. So I wasn't involved in an academy.
Right.
I had a good education. I had some background in law that I sort of, I wanted to use. It was 4 years of my life. I didn't want to completely throw it away.
No.
And that's why, to be honest, like while I played, all the players said, right, you've got to be our player rep for the player association. Something reserved for normally the older senior players, but I think that was my first year I was with the player association. But anyway, when sort of I finished, I had these ideas about what I wanted to do, and that probably played into the fact, do I want to coach? I've done this legal degree. I feel like I'd like to put my mind to things outside of the oval ball and the rectangular field. So there was a little bit of that at play, and that sort of explain the way I went after I finished playing.
No, that makes perfect sense. And one of the things we often say, Conrad, to people is looking back, what are the sort of do's and don'ts? And obviously everybody comes into the sport in a different way, different pathways, as you say, academies or not. And you invest in your education, you did that degree first. And it's interesting because this is not in any way a judgment of players, but whatever discipline we're talking about, rugby, that was your background, but there is downtime. There is downtime in the training week, and we're not advocating people doing things that compromise their physical recovery. But one of the things that I think is a wise investment for anybody to consider is, how can you enhance your skills? Maybe it's a degree, maybe it's part-time studies, maybe it's some other form of education or course, not least because it's giving you perspective and ideas and fueling the mind of what might come after sport. But I also think it's just good for your mental health and an ability to switch off. We talked about pressure. If you're constantly talking about your discipline and analysing your performance, and that's all you do, it's very hard to release the pressure, particularly if you don't have a partner, a husband or a wife to go home to, or a distraction, kids. If you're a single individual and you go home to an empty apartment or home and all you think is performance, I don't think that's necessarily very healthy. So in the role you are now and supporting so many people, is that a belief you share, to explore that time that you have on your hands to invest in your own growth and development in whatever framework that might look like?
Absolutely. The irony of it is it actually helps your performance, and there's science out there. So, I mean, you talked about that it helps your mental health, it helps your growth, it does all that for sure, but it actually improves your performance when you can switch off and focus on something else. It's been proven when you come back to that task, when you come back to your rugby, if you've got that switch off, when you then switch on, you are that more highly attuned, you are that much more focused, that it's no surprise you look at, and we used to talk about within the All Black environment, we'd always look at the more experienced, the better performers, and find they were the ones that always shut out of the environment, and you had your own way. So,
Right.
and you mentioned before, you might have a family, and so it was in my case, the Brad Thorne that went away. If he had a day off, he was the whole day with his family. That was his switch off. It was, for me, in the earlier part of my life. And so I used to go into a law office. I was passionate about, and I knew it wasn't because I was developing as a lawyer. It was my switch off. I just wanted to
Right.
immerse myself in a different life, so that when I came back, this is great. I'm a rugby player. I hadn't spent my day off looking over clips again, or
Yeah.
going into the gym and trying to find something else I could do. It was a complete switch off, and all the better players, the more experienced, you learn that. You either learn it the hard way, or like I said, I feel like I was a little bit fortunate. I learned it just the way I came into the game. But there are so many benefits from it, and
Yeah.
it is performance related as well. So if you want to increase your performance on your day off, have a day off. Don't train again, because it will make you worse.
That is such a powerful rallying call, because any of the cynics that are listening going, yeah, I've heard this before, I should invest, to bring it back to performance and to hear that from you, I think is super powerful. Now we're talking about, here's a strategy to enhance your performance. When you put it in that framework and you talk about the greats and someone like Brad Thorne, who's been there, done it in both codes of rugby league and rugby union, there's no surprise that you're seeing that pattern. And therefore, I think when you talk about developing habits of high performers, you see that, as you say, you're a young player coming through, you start to do it, people then look at you, they start to do it. So I think you've struck on another powerful motivator for people to look at that recovery time. And I know you said it was part of the switch off, but it's a theme that's come through from so many retired athletes. Explore opportunities to go into industry. You talked about going into a law office. There's networks of sponsors, there's people connected to clubs or international teams, whatever it may be. There are opportunities all around you to pick up the phone or speak to your commercial teams or your marketing teams and say, could you open a door for me to go and spend some time to look at things? Because I think a lot of it circles back to your earlier point, Conrad, of, well, I'm just going to coach because I don't know any different. But these 2 points we've just touched on, if you invest in yourself and you invest in things on your day off, well, then you widen your choices, and coaching might still be the thing, but you widen the opportunities. And if you take the time to go and talk to people like you did, go into a law office, it will either reinforce to you, I'm on the right track, or perhaps let you know, maybe this isn't for me after all. So you've touched on something else very briefly that I wanted to go back to, taking the time to go and look at what's in your existing ecosystem to get a deeper insight.
Yeah, and there are opportunities like that everywhere as a player that you will take for granted. Like I don't think any player does it enough in terms of the people you meet, and it will close pretty quickly. And this is someone now that's finished the game, and you look back and you appreciate just the amount of opportunities that you look at, and they might have been a chore because they were a sponsor event where you were going. And like I always say to players now, why not try to make the most of it? You're going to the sponsored event anyway.
Yeah.
So why not go and talk to him? Because you never know, just as you were saying before, he could be the guy that ends up providing you an opportunity, or she could be the one that knows someone who you have a passion about, and there you go, you're away, and that create, and man, the players everywhere can provide stories of those sort of links that
Yeah.
have led to genuine opportunities.
And I'm so happy you mentioned it and you frame it like that, Conrad, because it comes through repeatedly from retired athletes to say, often you look at those sponsors events, it's a bit of a chore. Perhaps you're injured, you're not on the field on match day, so you work in the corporate lounges, you feel a bit frustrated, and actually you're missing the point. You can't physically be on the field, you're either not being selected through form or through fitness. Make the most of that opportunity, build your network, develop your insights and your knowledge. Don't see it as a chore because, again, you've framed it perfectly. Time passes quickly. You might think there's years and years, but that time goes quickly and then you look back. So we're in that guise of do's and don'ts, Conrad. Do explore these opportunities, do things on your day off that help you grow and prepare for that transition. Is there anything that, with the benefit of hindsight, if you were going back to your younger self or to players or men and women that are still in that sporting discipline, is there anything that you'd say is a don't? A piece of advice that you'd say, don't do this. Does there anything come to mind when I ask you that?
Probably we've covered it a little bit, but yeah, like just don't feel that more is more in terms of your sport. Like don't get hung up on your sport and feel like if things are going, badly or things aren't going the way you want it, the answer isn't always just trying harder and doing more. It's often stepping back, stepping away, and making sure you're in it for the right things and keeping your perspective about everything, because it's just a game. Whatever sport you're in, it's just a game, and you'll realize that one day. And I know, look, I was as intense and as passionate as anyone, and any teammate would tell you that. But I feel like, again, the way I came into the sport and the pathway I had, I'm hugely grateful for, because I do think that I was always someone that could step back and say, when times were tough, or even when times were great, I could step back and say, all right, this is just one part of my life. It's not everything.
Yeah.
And so just because I've won the Rugby World Cup, I'm not some sort of god. And
No.
just because I've lost a game and been dropped doesn't mean I'm a bad person. There's still, huge parts of life to live, and that's it's really important. It's easier said than done at times, but it's hugely important.
And I think that's a wonderful piece of wisdom again to share. And I think it leads very much into that identity crisis concept that comes up so often, that when so much intensity is put into me as an individual, as an athlete, as a professional, when it stops, it's harder to make that transition. If you can periodically step back, reflect, see that there is multi facets to who you are, it makes that transition a bit easier. But as you rightly say, very, very difficult. We shared a link to an article not so long back from Dan Carter talking about that very challenge, being at the top of the game for so long and struggling with that shift in identity when you're no longer a professional player, you're no longer an All Black. So again, just reinforcing your point, it's easier said than done. But one of the steps is try and take a bigger, wider perspective when you're still playing. I think that's really powerful advice. So I want to because your desire to help people obviously shines through from a young age. You're in that sort of player representative element. You've gone into the International Players Association in what you're doing now, and you're linking in. And then obviously very recently with the Global Rugby Players Foundation, there's sort of a who's who of retired stars, you being one, who have obviously seen fit to step forward and create another organisation very much designed to help people. So just give us a bit of an overview of that entity, how that came about, and what that's trying to achieve as well, because I think it has so much synergy with everything we're talking about and helping people transition successfully.
Yeah, it does. And I think that's all it started with conversations and work, I think, within player associations. So more and more of the work while I was, playing in New Zealand, there was a understanding of the need or the willingness to try and support players as they finish the game. And, rugby hasn't been professional for long, and, relative to other sports particularly.
Yep.
And so it was quite a new problem, because the benefit of amateur, of course you didn't get paid. So it wasn't hugely beneficial to those players, but at least that allowed you to develop life skills. And most people had other jobs. So actually, when you transition, it wasn't so hard because you actually, you just fall back on the job you had often while you were playing rugby, or at least before you started playing full time. And so, there was an awareness. Now this is professional. We're taking players out of school sometimes. They're going into academies. When they come out, this is really tough. They've missed that opportunity to develop themselves. So how can we help them? And then I think we realised this isn't just a New Zealand problem, because over in France, the same thing, in England. And then it was sort of the conversation, why do we let each individual union, in a rugby sense, do this? Because there's actually, as this was happening, there was some great ideas, there was some great programs getting developed, in terms of how we can help rugby players, but they just didn't have any resource, and unions didn't have resource. They were saying, no, we're busy paying our players. And so you're going cap in hand trying to fund these programs to support players, and you realize we should be doing this on a global level. This is a problem we're all facing, and so why don't we gather money globally? And that's really, over a long period, but those conversations sort of were going on, and you've mentioned Dan, and he was someone passionate about it. Myself and we just tapped shoulders and said, and it was everyone who shoulder we tapped was absolutely keen and passionate, because we all saw the problem straight away. So Terry Dissertoire, Johnny Wilkinson, Richie McCaw, all of them, there was no one that said no to this. Like, it was because all of us were at this stage living it. But more importantly, we had seen a lot of ex-teammates going through this and struggling. Unfortunately, there were some that had done well, but it was the ones that struggled that, I think it would be fair to say, motivated us to say, right, what can we do? And the way we saw it as player associations was get us funding, get us money. And it might sound a little bit crude, but we don't need to create a program, because there's actually a lot of great programs, a lot of good people like yourself, James, and that understand the problem and have ideas around how to fix it, but they don't have any resource. So, the Global Rugby Player Foundation was set up, and it was to make awareness. There's a few objectives of the foundation, but really it's around making people aware of the problem, raising funds to then put into programs at a national level, because we don't want to deal with this globally in terms of the program, because it's actually, we've talked a lot about how it's specific to individuals. It's also specific to countries, and the cultures, implementation has to very much be one-on-one. This is not, you can't deal with this problem from an office in Dublin and say, this is what you should do when you retire from rugby, do this and that, and you'll be fine. So it's actually resourcing people to connect with those players, find out what they're good at, educate them around all the stuff we've talked about, what their crossover skills are, where they can find work, what they're passionate about, what you need to do when you finish playing, because you're going to be outside a team environment, but you still want to stay fit and healthy and be close to your family. And there's a whole lot in that, but
there's some fabulous stuff, and credit to you. I think obviously we're very aligned. It shines through in everything that you're saying, but I think it talks cheap, and action is always where you judge things. And you've got together as a very high profile group, and you're making waves in a space that I think is critical. And I 100% endorse what you're saying. It's a global problem, and it's multidisciplinary as well. We're talking to people in rugby, in cricket, in soccer, Olympians, you name it. Pretty much everybody has had challenges with stepping out of one chapter into the next. So I love what we're doing. And now, in part of the research, it's a bit of a random sort of pivot, but there was some transitional information. I'm not sure if it was in the Global Players Foundation or within your international players, but there was a little tip sheet about post World Cup, thinking about what you're doing in the first 3 days, the first 3 weeks, the first 3 months. And that led me into a video, and there was different players talking, and I think it was you that came through talking about disappearing off to Machu Picchu in Peru post 2011. Was that, did I identify your voice correctly? Was that you talking about that?
Yeah, it was.
So this is a good way. We go back where we started dealing with pressure. You had a pretty strategic plan then. So post World Cup final, come what may, you were gone.
Yeah. I mean, and to be fair, like I had, it had been a busy 3 or 4 sort of years for me leading up, and it was popular then within New Zealand to take sabbaticals or breaks, from the game, and that was me. I saw, from the start of the year, I was like, right, I'll be by the end of this World Cup, I'm going to be cooked. We've either won it and I'm going to need to get out, or we've lost it and I'm going to want to flee. So either way, I was going, and my now wife and I planned a trip, and I booked it all well before the tournament. But I was 3 days after the final, I was on a plane, and
good man. What a play! I mean, what an
rugby
illustration
ball
of. Yeah, I mean, talk about perspective. You said you need to dial back, step away. What a wonderful place in the world to do that. And I bet it was pretty special when you got to the summit and you stood there reflecting on what you'd achieved. So, no, I think so much wisdom that you've shared with us today, Conrad. I really am very grateful for your time and the insights that you've shared. I wish you the best of luck with the initiatives that you're involved with. I think we're very aligned in what you're trying to achieve, and it's commendable that the impact that you're trying to make in that space. So just a final thank you very much. I think people get a lot from listening to your journey. If people are inspired and they want to reach out and connect with you, Conrad, where's the best place? Would it be LinkedIn if people wanted to find you and reach out personally?
Yeah, LinkedIn or through the International Rugby Players. So yeah, it's all available there. But no, I've enjoyed the chat, and like I say, there's a lot of great people like yourself that doing good work in this area, and it is needed, because it's still it is still something that sportsmen, and I've focused on rugby, but like you say, it's something across all sports that it's a real challenge, and the more awareness and the more help that is offered, then the better we'll be.
Exactly right, and I appreciate you building that awareness and putting the spotlight on it. So Conrad, thanks again, really appreciate your time.
Thanks for joining us this week on our ATA podcast. If you found this conversation insightful and it resonates with your journey, please subscribe, follow the show, and stay connected with us for more insight, resources, and information on how we at ATA are supporting your preparation for life beyond the game.